Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new issue of Divorcing with Dignity. And today we're here with Tally Rosenbaum, who it's a nice reunion for us because we actually were neighbors in Chicago a long time ago. And I'm going to let Tally introduce herself because she does something which is very unique, a unique service, a unique person, unique service, and something which I think our listeners are really, really going to benefit from. Tally, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me onto your program here. And I don't look at what I do as that unique, but maybe because the fact that you're saying that here, it just needs to be talked about more. And there need to be more resources and more knowledge and awareness of the type of resource provided in the work that I do. A lot of therapists involve themselves in this kind of specialty as well. So I'll introduce myself. I'm an individual therapist. I'm a psychotherapist. So I do individual one-on-one psychodynamic psychotherapy, but I also do couples therapist. And I'm a certified sex therapist and a sex therapy supervisor. I weave all these things together in my work. So I work with couples, and I also specialized people that come to me know that they can bring up issues of intimacy, obviously emotional intimacy, everything having to do with communication and vulnerability and empathy and how to interact with one another with dignity. You called it divorcing with dignity. And then as a certified sex therapist, I'm also able to work specifically with whatever issues might come up around intimacy and sexuality. Well,
Okay, great. So we're going to jump right in it. I just want to give a short disclaimer that, as always, advice is personalized and tailor-made. These are ideas being exchanged. There's no legal advice, therapeutic advice being given here. This is an exchange of ideas, and perhaps maybe our listeners can learn from this conversation that there is a place where their concerns or their issues can be addressed, and they don't have to struggle with this alone, and that they're really, really not alone, that many, many, many people struggle with this. I think that even, the choice of language that we're going to use, and we'll try to be sensitive, right? But we don't use the word often in certainly in the circles that I travel in. We don't use the word sex very often. We use code words, right? We use the mitzvah, we use intimacy, relations. We have a lot of words that are euphemisms, right? And I think that part of the problem and part of the solution is that in terms of part of the problem, that we don't use the explicit word sex or sexuality very often, because it evokes a certain amount of shame within people. This is something that I want to talk with you today about also, healthy shame versus unhealthy shame. So at the same time, where it keeps things very private and personal and holy, it also kind of elicits a certain kind of shame in talking about it. So people are hesitant to, even when they're in years with a therapist who they have a great relationship with, they won't bring up topics of sexuality slash intimacy. So the first question I want to ask you is, from your clinical experience with couples who are close to divorce, contemplating divorce, thinking about divorce, how often does sexuality play a major part in their spiraling towards the divorce?
it's a very good question. I mean, it's a kind of a question. The how often questions are based on, those have statistical answers, and I'm not going to be able to provide you with that. But I think what's more important about is the question not how often, but how. How does sexuality play a role in divorce or in the relationship itself, and in the issues leading to divorce? And obviously, when we're talking about marriage which has gone awry, a marriage which has gone in the direction of divorce, and as you know, there are many, many different reasons for it, depending on whether it's a very short marriage, early marriage. Often early marriages to end because of issues related to intimacy, and sexuality. And I do think it's really important to define our terms here. You were talking about how language is so important, and yet we're very hesitant to use the exact language. And so, what I would say about that is that what's probably even more relevant, the act of sexual intercourse or chaye ishut, or however you want to put it, is the idea of is the relationship, does it feel intimate, which means does it feel safe? Is there communication which feels contained? Does it feel like you can express your feelings and those feelings are able to be mirrored back? Do I feel validated? Do I feel respected? Is there dignity in the way that we're interacting with one another? Is there empathy? Is there compassion? If there is conflict, and all marriages have conflict, and conflict in marriage is not a bad sign at all, do we know how to respectfully recover in the marriage and feel like our partner understands us and we can go back to understanding one another?
I,
All of that.
I
Yes.
think what I'm hearing, like
Yeah.
if I could sum up everything you're saying, is safety. I have to feel safe in this relationship.
Right. Sexuality is not really even relevant if you're not feeling safe. So the idea of sex as an act that you do, that's part of your obligation or that's part of the expected interaction, but it doesn't feel loving, it doesn't feel pleasurable, it doesn't feel bonding, it doesn't feel kind, it doesn't feel um, anonymous, it doesn't feel consensual, all of those things, then that's not what what I think most of us value in terms of what's important for sexuality in marriage. Sexuality is meant to be an expression, the bond and the love created in a marriage between two people. When it's used as leverage, when it's used as something that I'm entitled to or something that you are obligated to provide, it loses the flavor of safety or of intimacy. It becomes kind of like either an entitlement or an obligation or something that I need to provide in order to receive something else. And then it becomes problematic because it's very difficult to feel safe in those circumstances.
It becomes transactional,
It becomes transactional.
and that's quite the opposite of what marriage is. Whereas, again, I apologize to our listeners if some of the language offends, but that's prostitution, right? Sex for is in a transactional framework is not a relationship, right? That's something similar to selling oneself, which is always, and that's actually one of the things that hashkafically the Torah really, really frowns upon, not just be, and there are many halachas which are implemented in order to prevent a woman from having to go down to that level and support herself because she has no means of support except for that. Which is that's a whole other topic. I don't want to get so into those halachas.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I would comment
actually
on only
fascinating.
the, I would comment on that only because, we talked about there being a lot of shame. And I think that, we need to understand that women who feel like they have to have sex in order to survive in the marriage, we really need to hold a lot of compassion for that, and that they don't need to feel shamed by it. They do need to be empowered by somebody like you, who's a ready woman, who's out there helping women to kind of get out of these situations. And I think that that's very, very important. But I do think that some amount of transaction, in a way, if you would want to narrow it down to that, some amount of transaction is there in every relationship as long as it's mutual and consensual and nobody's feeling like they have to do something because of the fear of there being negative consequences. Because even in a marriage that's not necessarily on the way to divorce, we could look at it as problematic if a woman is having sex because of the fear that there are going to be negative consequences, even if it means, well, my husband's going to be in a bad mood. So we want to look at this dynamic of sexuality in terms of what is the meaning of sex? What does it mean to have enthusiastically consensual sex that both partners are agreeing to, not because if I do it, it will help me avoid a negative outcome, but because if I do it, you know, we strengthen the bond between us, and we improve our intimacy and our relational and emotional health and our relationship to one another.
So let's play out that example that you recently gave that I feel like I have to have sex with my husband because if not, he'll be in a bad mood. Right? So
That's
again, we're
one
talking,
example. Yeah.
we're taking one example and people are extremely complicated and there's, years of history, from childhood on about these issues. But in a very general, and that's why I really ask my listeners, please, do not take this as tailor-made advice for you. These are ideas being thrown around. But in that example, right? How could and it could be the opposite too, a man who feels like, oh, I have to do this for my wife now, otherwise, I mean, we don't realize that also happens. Okay, it does work
Yeah,
both ways. Um,
absolutely.
so you have one spouse who's just not there, and like, okay, if not, the other spouse is going to be in a bad mood. How could the spouse who could frame their mindset in a way where they're not acting in a codependent way, they're not acting in a transactional way. Like, what could they say to say, you know what? Um, this is really more your department, but I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm investing right now in this relationship, or I love my husband, so and it's not because I want to prevent him from being in a bad mood, but to reframe it in, you know what? I'm not always in the mood and he's there for me, right? He pays the bills even when he's not in the mood to pay the bills, or he goes to work, or he does whatever he does. So how could one frame it in a way where it won't be damaging to the relationship or to themselves?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to know your boundaries and to know what you want. And there are levels of consent, right? There is enthusiastic consent, and not everybody is going to feel that, especially even I'm talking about a healthy relationship over time where you love your husband and you just don't always feel like you're in the mood, and there will be the times where you might kind of cognitively decide that you can get in the mood, meaning that the interaction itself is usually very pleasurable and you're not unhappy the outcome, and the interaction itself is usually something that kind of like exercise. I don't really want to go, it's late, but I'm going to be so happy that I did it afterwards. I just needed a little push. And so that would be a level whereby it would be completely fine to say, I love him and he's great and he took the kids today and I think I can get into the mood. Beyond that, to just kind of agree to it because, it's because of anything other than the fact that I'm going to get something out of it as well. That's already going into slippery slope territory, not really being fully consensual, not really feeling autonomy. Um, what you were saying about not becoming enmeshed into his bad mood or codependent, for example, I think we need to be able to tolerate that, when we're in a differentiated relationship, when we appreciate that I'm one way, you're another way, I'm not in the mood, you are in the mood, we can bring empathy to that, meaning we can say, it's okay, and it's okay for me to say no. And it's So, thinking to yourself, we're two different people. I'm not in the mood. You are in the mood. And I don't have to feel bad or guilty about not being in the mood because I'm entitled to not be in the mood, but I also don't have to be defensive about it. I can be empathic to you. I understand that you're in the mood. And I also will think about when I might be in the mood, how I can offer or initiate. But I think that the idea that I need to have sex because I can't contain you being in a bad mood. It's really about differentiation. I'm aware that you're not, that it's hard for you. And I even can give you empathy for it, but I can't always be there in that way. Look, I think that we also have to acknowledge, Shoshi, that the culture, like socioculturally, women often get messages, often very strong messages, that
Absolutely.
a woman is a good woman, does her husband's will,
Right.
and that a man is pretty helpless without his wife, and he doesn't really have an, any other options, and so you should not be responsible for his potential straying or sinning. And I think that
Or
those
even
messages
on a simpler level, a bad mood.
or a bad mood, right? And that your responsibility for that can create a sense that you don't really have a choice. And that can be very harmful. And it's not necessarily the man who is utilizing that as leverage. Often
Right.
husbands are not interested. Husbands, normal men are not so invested in having relations that the woman does not want to have. Most men really don't want it that way. They don't want to feel like they themselves are coercing their wives or they're predators. They don't want to feel that way. They want sex that is mutual and consensual.
Absolutely. I get that a lot, meaning that's what I see a lot, where women feel that the halacha demands from them that, whenever, whatever, under any circumstances, and that saying no is considered, makes them what's called halachically a moredet, which means a rebellious woman. What's the information which is also often withheld is that there's something called an aleph, a mored, right? A man who is rebellious in this specific area. And also, what are the conditions, right? It's not so simple that no equals moredet. Like, it's actually a very complicated process for a woman to be called a moredet or for a man to be called a moredet. It's a complicated halachic process. And even if a woman is classified as a moredet, what I'll also often tell my clients is, okay, so you're a moredet. That's a decision you're making. Like, you are allowed to make that decision. What's the cost of that decision? Not too much. The ketubah, between 80 and 90% of women forfeit on their ketubah because it's worth it to take the pension instead of the ketubah, or to do things according to the law instead of the halacha, which is mostly how we do things today. Ketubah cases are very rarely done today. Even it's just not worth it. I tell my clients often, you will pay me more to run your ketubah case and win it, then your ketubah is worth it. So although I really do love making money, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Not worth it to have those conversations, and you won't walk away with too much money, even if you win. Now, when a Sephardi woman comes to me and she has a very big ketubah, you're talking about a couple 100,000 shekels, sometimes 500,000 shekels. So then I'll say, you know what, let's talk about it. And those cases are also sometimes very easily won. Or the Beit Hadin will say, you know what, instead of 500,000 shekels, give her 250,000 shekels, and let's call it a day. And that's definitely worth it. So it's sometimes it pays to actually be a mored, because it's the
Yeah,
right thing to do for that marriage.
yeah.
Um,
I appreciate how you're reframing it. I think that for many women who, really want to do the right thing and who really see themselves as women who are righteous and who follow the law, and then they obviously won't, or in most cases just can't do this because there is not safety and there is not intimacy. They feel that, having to carry the Moredet label is an identity crisis. It doesn't really fit with who they are. And
So
the other
it kind,
yeah,
it's a reframe. Like,
yeah, it's a
you
reframe.
have more the Mordim in Iran right now, the rebels in Iran, and they're doing a good rebellion.
Right, a
Like,
good
it's not always a
rebellion. Yeah,
negative thing to
yeah,
do something and say, you know what, I need to stand up for my rights. And most of the time, a woman who gets to that place, I'm not saying all the time, right? It's not exclusive, but most of the time that a woman gets to that place, she's not halachically a moredet. There usually are halachot which will say they cannot have sex right now. That this is not okay.
no,
For
for
them to
sure.
be in
That,
an
the,
intimate
I mean, the
relationship.
Torah doesn't want. I don't think that on any level anybody would agree that it's okay to coerce your wife into sex. I have a podcast with Rabbi Scott Kahn from Ramat Beit Shemesh, and it's called Intimate Judaism. And one of the very frequent topics that we address is this idea of obligation in marriage, and also healthy sexuality in marriage as kind of meant to provide for each partner their needs, but that we can't always be there to provide for each other's needs for various reasons. And then what happens when there is this sense of sex as an obligation, and or fear of sin, which is the sin that I think we all know what we're talking about, right? And that is so ingrained in some women. and also in men, that fear that it really takes away from the actual importance of mutual consent in marriage. And the Torah is based on a mutual consent. At no point does it say that you are allowed to coerce your wife into having sex that she does not want to have for whatever reason.
Um, one of the often the conversations that I end up having is I'll have a woman who's married for years, 10, 15, sometimes 20 or even 30 years. Um, and at a certain point, she something clicks within her. And part of it may be sometimes the older women who are in their 50s, which is very popular right now, gray divorce, which is something which in the beginning of my practice I didn't see. I saw mostly young couples, 10 years, 12 years, not like 20, 30, 35. I did a divorce recently for someone who was married 35 years. Um, but I find that two issues. The first one that I want to talk about, which is coming up more and more now, is that women and sometimes men, I do have more women clients than men, so I do see this, and these are not things that I've done scientific studies on, um, that they all of a sudden like past memories come up, abuse from childhood comes up, and it all of a sudden plays a huge role, untreated trauma, a huge role in the relationship. Whereas the first 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 years of the marriage were great, where there was maybe repression of the memories or a lack of triggers. And then all of a sudden it comes up. How often do you see that past sexual abuse or severe trauma in relationship trauma comes up, and is it fixable?
Okay, I see it often. And what I want to say about that is it's actually quite uncommon, although it may happen and somebody might be listening to this and say, yeah, but to have a history of trauma and to actually go through your first 10 years of marriage where everything is okay. What's most likely happening is that the dynamic in the marriage may, on some level, it could be happening. It may have happened that the dynamic in the marriage was healing and there was so much safety there and consent and boundaries that it didn't trigger the past. And that's wonderful when that happens. But more often than not, the there's some kind of reenactment where the marriage itself is almost a continuation. Because what happens in early in sexual abuse is that often it's by somebody who you know and somebody who's been grooming you, and the relationship is very ambivalent because you love him, but you also hate him or her, depending on. And when you get married, there's almost that same kind of ambivalent relationship that goes on where there's also a dependence and there's also a use of sexuality to get closeness. So it's very, very hard to, thread these things out. And it often takes some time to unravel, where is the original trauma? And it doesn't always even really matter that much. What happens is that, anybody with a history of trauma will often disassociate during sexual relations and will not have necessarily even realized that they weren't completely consensual, that they mostly dissociated. Also, a lot of times people talk about trauma and trauma responses, and they say, well, you must have been or early in marriage when the woman gets married and she's having difficulty and she's contracting and she's not allowing, and they're saying, oh, you have this vaginal problem and you need to go to this bodecet and this physical therapist and this that, and they're saying, there must be trauma there must be trauma there, and the trauma isn't from that. The trauma is from the bodecet and from the all the intervention and
I
from the
think that's
having.
such an important point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Until the
it
marriage,
becomes
they were fine. Their body was theirs. Nobody tried invading it. And then all of a sudden, you have to do this, and you have to do bedikas, and you have to allow it, and you have to, have the bodeka check you, and you have to have your hymen cut, and you have, and it's that's the trauma. That's the trauma.
wow. That's a very, very important point. We should bring in a yoetzet halacha. That's what I'll do next to talk about these issues because that's
Well,
part of the
yeah. So, in the
solution.
yoetzet halachot, yoetzot halacha are very common in the modern Orthodox world. And, the whole kind of approach is changing with the idea of consent and, you know, not necessarily being ready on your wedding night and it's needing to take time, becoming more mainstream. It's becoming more mainstream. And, you know, talking to Kala instructors, talking to women who educate Kalot, this idea of this is what's going to happen on your wedding night. Even that language, I'm so afraid of what's going to happen. Well, what's going to happen has a lot to do with what you want to happen or what don't want to happen, you can control. And a lot of times this information is not given in any sort of explicit way. And if it's not given explicitly, then the default understanding is that, my husband has something that he needs to do. And again, we're making this a lot more about the woman than the man. I have to say that there are many men who also experience trauma from the marriage, from the early marriage, from being told that um, they have to be able to do this act and they have to do it right and they have to do it on their wedding night and they have a lot of trauma, especially if they're told, God forbid, but I've heard it. It doesn't matter if she cries and I mean, just terrible stuff. And they're in trauma from being put in the situation of being, don't want to say it, but
Right. Being the bad guy.
being a very bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that and making their wives cry and making their wives upset or kind of being given the wrong information about whether it's okay to have relations with your wife anyways. I've had men say, I thought that I should just do it because if I wait for her to want it, she'll never want it. So I guess it's the best I could get. So at least we could do it when the Dayan says we have to do it. Or, the whoever it is, the Chassan Rebbe tells us twice a week. So, in the Hasidic communities, they have very specific information and advice about when to do it. And there almost isn't she's not being asked what does she think about it or what does she feel about it
Right.
or, what does she want or that kind of thing and that's hard because autonomy is an important part of sexuality. If you don't feel like you have it, it's going to be very hard to develop a sense of this is what I want, this is what I want to enjoy, this is what I want to feel, these are the breaks that I need, these are the boundaries that I need. You don't have that language.
Right. And that it's going to be used as a bond between the couple and not to actually further the distance between them.
Well, it could be used as a bond, but
And
part
that's
of
what I'm saying. Either it's going to be a
right.
bond or it's going to
But by
create.
the way, it's not going to be a bond, even if the intentions are good. It's going to be difficult to bond over it if you don't have the basic information about pleasure, about what it's supposed to feel like for you. If you're doing it and you're not getting pleasure from it or satisfaction, it's more likely to harm you. It's not a neutral. It's not like, well, nothing bad is going to happen. Yeah, it's
So
not like
which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Meaning, um, do couples start off with bad communication and that creates a very bad intimate relationship? Or do they have a bad intimate relationship and then the whole relationship ends up going down?
Well, Shoshi, I think we have to first realize that the relationship is a very important variable in sexuality, but it's only one variable. In other words, there are so many variables involved in sexuality, in the development of a sexual sense of self. First, you have to even have developed a sense of self. And within that sense of self, you will have had to develop a body image, a sense of connection to your body, a relationship with sensations, with pleasure, a relationship with your emotions, with your ability to communicate assertively, a yes, a no. In other words, if you come to marriage and you don't even have a basic sense of self, let alone knowledge of yourself sexually, that's already going to be a barrier in developing communication, also emotionally, spiritually, uh, certainly cognitively, and also sexually. And so that's that. So it's really hard to say what comes first because there's a whole salad of, some women will say the sex feels good, but I have no connection with my husband. That's very rare to hear, but that can happen, you know,
I actually have heard that.
physiology. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a fascinating case where, they literally both of them hated each other. And when I mean hate, I mean like scary hate, loath, like really. But they both claimed that they had great sex, and it was like, okay,
Well, it might
to
have
each their
been
own.
it might have been physiologically great sex, but if you consider the intimate attachment and the loving feelings and the bonding and the nurturing and the touching and the talking as part of a loving relationship, it doesn't sound like that would be
Right.
consistent with what you're
It's
describing.
extremely, extremely rare. I think. I had a case, and I'm a little bit hesitant to bring this up, but I think it's important if we're talking about getting information out there to people and people understanding that this is a complicated issue and there's avenues to address it. One of the first cases I had was a very, very young couple, married for a couple weeks, and she comes home one day and he is wearing her underwear.
Hmm.
Okay. And they're really Hasidish. And that's why I'm a little bit more comfortable saying this because there's no way that they're ever going to hear this. They also not the language that they speak. And she wanted an immediate divorce. Freaked out, went back to her mother's house. I want to get divorced. And when the story came to me, okay, that really isn't the norm. Okay, that's not the norm. But on the other hand, like every person has their preferences, their things and that something out of the norm might just be okay. There was a certain, it wasn't workable. It wasn't workable because she was so closed-minded that this is something so horrible and so disgusting. She lost all respect and all potential to learn to respect somebody. And to me, it was very sad. I mean, obviously, they weren't meant to be together if that's how disgusted she was by it. But I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Like that.
Yeah. Look, here's the thing. It's always a little bit different when you're working with a very insular population that really doesn't have a lot of knowledge or healthy access to sexual information. And that there's a very narrow kind of idea of what you do and how you do it. Now, the fact is that you're right. Putting a man putting on a woman's underwear doesn't, it sounds like, okay, so he's into something a little bit different, and that it shouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker. And across the spectrum of things that can be out there that are different, it might seem like a mild one, right? And this is very interesting too. I'm in this kind of world where most of my clients are somewhere on the spectrum of orthodoxy. But also as a sex therapist, I'm very attuned and exposed to all the different possibilities out there. And I think that one of the differences is that, let's just say you are a secular person, and you are oriented a certain way, whether it's what you like to put on or whether it's you like to engage in activities that are, um, that 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 use some amount of like domination or pain or those kinds of things as part of your sexuality, right? For the most part, you're going to be involved in finding a partner who's into that same thing, right? Now, I always like to say when I have a couple where one person is into something and the other person is not, and they'll say, well, in the secular world, people do these things. I'm like, yeah, well, was it on your shidduch resume? Like, there's no way to
Yeah,
know
there's no
beforehand
way.
because nobody talks about it, and people, and there's a lot of shame, and it's not something you're gonna necessarily share, certainly not if you're Hasidic.
And it could be something that the person themselves doesn't even know about.
And it also could be something that does, even though my secular colleagues will like, new me on this. But it is something that could be indicative of some deeper pathology. Now, in sex therapy, they don't like to pathologize anything, right? Any kink is okay and anything is okay, but it's a different society because everything is okay as long as you're choosing it and it's not dissonant. But when it's dissonant and it's, then you have to wonder. So when you tell when a Dayan says to a Hasidic woman, who doesn't know anything from anything, right? That she should do whatever her husband wants to do, even if he wants to tie her up, she should go for it. Well, in the secular world, no woman who's vanilla, which means they don't go for that kind of thing, they just go for the regular stuff, is going to agree to do that. If you're going to do those activities, they need to be consensual by both partners. Both partners have to enjoy that kind of stuff. And if not only is it very different than what you expected, but now you also have to go along with it. It's not okay. And so,
As you said before, that's really taking away someone's autonomy and
totally,
agency in a
totally,
very severe way.
totally. Now, the ability to kind of be able to, um, and that is a mild example. There are all sorts of kinks and fetishes and all sorts of things that people bring. I won't even list them, but the idea that you need to understand it. You need to be able to process it. You need to see where it meets you for each partner. It's very difficult to do that when you hardly know each other to begin with. So if they were like a couple that were dating for, many, many months and they got to know each other, and then he comes in with this, by the way, I have this thing where I like to wear women's underwear. It would land very differently because all right, well, let's talk about it and let's try to understand it and let's go to therapy together. And maybe it is something I can deal with. But when you don't know it, the person from the beginning, and then you get this thing, okay, it's like it also reflects on you. You feel like, wait a second, that's not fair. Why are they I'm so like halakha, I'm so perfect. Why am I getting this guy that has a flaw? Because only people with flaws get put with other people with flaws. I mean, I had a woman who said to me, "Is that what they think of me?" I didn't realize she didn't realize that the guy had a stutter. And after they got married, because they only met for, you know, whatever, the half an hour, and then and then she didn't really speak to him, and then they got married, and then she realized, is that what they think of me? Like, what do they? It was all about her. Like, how would they think about me that I deserve a guy with a stutter? Now, it could be that he was a very nice guy, but that's, this idea that you got you got something off, and I think that could go into that category as well.
Very interesting. I didn't think about it that way. That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Something that I've been seeing a lot also now is couples who are married also for not a short time, a certain amount of years. Um, the partner, one of them, and I have a lot of women also and men clients, who they realize that they don't want to be in what's called a straight relationship. They're homosexual, they're gay or they're lesbian. It's a huge issue.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's a huge, huge issue. And that's also like I don't even know, according to halacha, it's really simple, right? It's simple on one level because they're doing something which is against halacha. However, I just want to point out, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. I have seen couples who, and again, this is only when it comes later, right? When they've been together for 5, 6, 7 years, and there is other good stuff in the relationship. There's good communication, there's a lot of empathy, there's safety, there's understanding, there's compassion. They're able to stay together and they're
Hmm.
able to pull it off. in a
Hmm.
respectful way,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of respect there already.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not talking about being staying together and then, the other one does conversion therapy. I was like, they stay together as one of the partners is gay, and they keep their
Yes.
family intact, and they do it in
Yeah.
a respectful and very honorable way. Um, and I think the secret of those couples is honesty. When you have somebody who can say, I am gay. I think you're great. I'm happy you're the mother of my children, but this is really not this is not how God made me. I'm not up for this. Like, this is not for me. And they can communicate and be honest, it actually could work. And it's the same thing, not only with this, let's say I have couples who sometimes one of them is not religious and they're like, okay, we have to get divorced. And I'm like, why do you have to get divorced? Like, if you want to get divorced, you get divorced. But believe me, I'm all for divorce. I'm not against divorce. I'm not Catholic, but you don't have to. It doesn't equal automatic divorce. Having one partner who's a homosexual doesn't equal automatic divorce. Having one partner who is not religious doesn't equal automatic divorce, as long as there is a lot of good honesty, communication, and respect. I'd like to hear if you think that's possible, if you've seen it.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of these cases in different ways. Look, the difference between and I think that when you have a partner who's no longer religious or no longer as religious, if you have the love and you really do have the caring for one another, and you're able to contain the differentiation, you do you, I do me. And I'm not saying that it's easy. I think that there's always a grieving process. You grieve for the change, and you're not who you were anymore, and it feels like a betrayal, and it has to go through a process. But a couple like that who are really committed to each other and are choosing to stay together, they don't have to stay together. It's not like
Right.
kafale amharkagigit. It's not like you know
Absolutely.
you're being forced into it. Then that they can make it work. Now the thing is with this, what we call the mixed orientation marriage, right? Mixed orientation marriage is that one partner is on the spectrum of what we call LGBTQ, which is lesbian or gay or whatever. And if there has been complete transparency and honesty and choice from the beginning, it's going to be rare. It's going to be rare, and the more you go to the right, it's going to be even more rare. In secular societies now, in the progressive societies, there's a new concept called mixed orientation relationships, and it's kind of like the opposite side of the spectrum, where it's like, for example, two asexual women who say, well, we're best friends and we want to get married too. And, like anybody can get married because the whole concept of marriage
Right.
is
It's totally different.
right. So
Right.
I'm talking now about the woke society, right? So they will choose it from a very different place. I think that mixed orientation marriages are far more common in traditional societies where it's not okay to be gay, right? There's no
It's not
choice to
okay to
be,
be gay, and it's not okay to be single.
and it's not okay to be single. It's very, 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 very difficult. So first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that for the most part, there is not transparency, and that when this is discovered, there is a great deal of betrayal. There is a great deal of pain. If there has been acting out sexually by the partner who can't get those needs met in the marriage, that's even more. There's also a tendency to call it sex addiction when it's not sex addiction. It's really just a guy who's gay, who's married to a woman who is going to get his needs met somewhere else. It's not an addiction. It's just, and when that stuff comes up, it's horrible. And it's horrible listen, it's very difficult for any partner to feel that they will never feel desired. They are not desired. They will never feel desired. Their partner will always feel like their husband or wife, whatever, is always. It's tragic. I see it in my office. I see the cases, and it's tragic because I also have cases where they are legitimately from like their
Yeah.
spiritual identity does
Yes.
not allow for their homosexual identity. It's got to be split, but it gets split, like it literally gets split. It doesn't go away. That's the problem. So what is probably psychologically
healthiest is, some way to integrate your real, authentic self with your spiritual self. In other words, that you shouldn't have to choose one or the other. And in more liberal Orthodox circles, that's starting to happen, where you can have a same-sex partner. And of course, for men, it's far more complicated than it is for women because of halachic issues. And, the way they get around it is don't ask what they do in bed, just like you don't ask any couple, even a heterosexual couple, what they do in bed. If two men choose to live together, you don't know what they're actually doing, and it's the actual act itself, which is against halacha. It is not being who you are.
A
Being
hundred,
homosexual
that's a
is not
very
it.
important distinction. And
Right.
they're actually within the Orthodox community, Rabbi Yanki Horowitz of Muncie is
Yeah.
now spearheading a very, very
Yeah.
important work in this.
He's doing beautiful work. He's doing beautiful work on this, on when your children come out to you, how to hold them and how to make them feel that they can be accepted for who they are. And, I think it's beautiful because he's starting to step into the more Haredi societies. And even, I mean, I think it's more like Chabad, but still, it can still get.
No kashrut
No,
to
no.
Chabad. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, whatever, wherever it can trickle in to more,
Right.
and also Rav Gedalia Penner has been doing work in this area. So, like, I think that it is very important to be able to be your authentic self. And it's also really important that if you do choose to be in a mixed orientation marriage, that there be complete transparency. There may be some reasons that the person would agree. Most heterosexual oriented people are not going to want from the get-go to make it work with somebody because they have a great deal of loss and sacrifice. Now, if they have a reason, maybe they don't really feel that sexuality is that important to them. Maybe they themselves are on the asexual spectrum. So, and maybe there are arrangements that are made, which, to me, I don't understand it. I don't understand rabbis who will tell people, to make an arrangement on the side, which is absolutely against everything that Jewish values stand for, in
I'm
order
not familiar with
to make
such
it work.
I've never come across
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. Well,
interesting.
I have, unfortunately. And, I think
Wait,
that
I'm just for clarity's sake. You're saying that
it's,
a rabbi said
yeah,
that they should have a woman or a man should have a relationship with another woman or man on the side.
yeah, to make it work. If that's what'll make it work so that they can get married and have children and do prurvu and be able and they
I
should
have
make.
to say I'm pretty shocked. I thought I heard it all. That's a new
Yeah.
one for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
But even in general, when you think about it, men who have to split their sexuality will often tend to have, non-halachic relationships for the greater purpose of being in a marriage. And when you think about it, two gay men who are committed to Judaism, who want to have a family, like, be, who want to live their lives in a way which is compatible with Jewish values. I know it sounds crazy, like because it's not
It
halachic.
actually doesn't sound crazy because like if we think about it, we all sin in different areas, right? We have different tendencies, different, I mean, I do plenty of sins, right? The I just don't talk about like my sins I can keep under the rug, right? You don't know
In the closet.
in the closet. Okay, that's a better metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, I can keep it quiet, right? I could bury them um in the
Yeah, but
closet.
your sexuality is part of who you are. It's very
Right.
hard to be
So
authentic.
and even, I plenty of, even somebody who, okay, I don't want to get into such examples. I want to bring the conversation back to the regular couples, but um, I think that it's very easy to understand. One of the greatest memes that I ever got was don't judge other people because they sin differently than you do. Like everybody has their thing. And
Right.
and so like that's their thing. That doesn't mean that they want to not keep
Yeah.
Shabbos because
Yeah.
they have a tendency towards
Yeah.
a homosexuality or that's their orientation or that's who they are. Like Shabbos has nothing to do with that. Like it's two different things that have nothing to do with each other.
Uh-huh.
I could keep kosher and not keep Shabbos. I could keep Shabbos and not keep kosher. We see that a lot, since the war, you have this great movement for people wearing tzitzit. You have men who wear tzitzit, who don't keep Shabbos and don't wear a kippah. But what does that have to do with now? So they shouldn't wear tzitzit? Like it, I think we just like it's in the Orthodox world and even in the modern Orthodox world and certainly in the Haredi Orthodox world, there is a real it's like used as like, oh, this is the worst thing that you could do. This is because woke is so into their, accept everything and everything is great. Instead of us just ignoring it, we got into this conflict with the woke. And I think it would be better just to like, okay, whatever. And like we just kept doing our thing, but we didn't just keep doing our thing. We went all out that like, oh, it's we use, you hear the word toeva being thrown around. That is a toeva, right? You hear all these words being thrown around, which are being, I don't want to say they're being misused because they're not. The Torah does say that. But the Torah also says that a person who speaks Lashon Hara is committing a chil Hashem. So like I, for one, have done a lot of chil Hashem in my life. Okay, I speak a lot of Lashon Hara. I actually get paid for speaking Lashon Hara. Like that's my job. But so what's the difference between me and them? They sin differently than I sin differently. I do plenty of bad things also.
I hear what you're saying. I think that we need to go even further than, just sinning and doing bad things and, kind of look at the fact that it's a huge, huge conflict for a religious person to be confronted with their sexuality. For a very, very long time, it was considered a pathology. And now we understand that it's not, it's just how you're wired and that it's a very, very difficult thing to integrate. So I want to say two things. One is that be very careful. You need therapy. If you're a couple that are dealing with this, or if you're an individual that's dealing with this and, your identity is about who you're attracted to, but also about your relationship with Hashem and, your spiritual identity. You want to be careful of two things. You want to be careful of the therapist who says you can change, because it's not likely you're going to be able to change. This idea of same-sex attraction, even the wording is usually a signal that this doesn't, they won't say the word gay, they won't say the word homosexual because they consider it a workable problem, right? But you also want to be afraid of a therapist that's going to say, listen, you can't get married to a person of the opposite sex because you're gay. That's not right. That's not fair. You have to accept that you're gay. Okay, that's also like there should not be any agendas by the therapist. And, therapy should be a place where you can figure it out for yourself. And I will go when I work with individuals or couples dealing with this, I do not tell them what to do. And I'm now working with a couple where she really is pretty much a lesbian. But for now, they really want to make it work and they want to stay together. And they are both so committed. This is Dafka, not a Haredi couple. They're Dati Leumi, but very, very very spiritual. And and she does not see herself going into this life. And, they need help to navigate it. And part of navigating it is putting it into words, acknowledging it, saying that it's there, knowing that it's there, crying over it. She has a nisayon, and so does he. And, as opposed to other couples where, they make it work. I have a Hasidic couple that they make it work together, but they have relationships on the side. So, that's how they make it work. I'm not judging. I can't judge. I can only be there to help them navigate.
Mm-hmm. A question that somebody sent in was healing from infidelity. Is it possible?
Yes, absolutely. It is possible. Absolutely. Infidelity can happen for so many reasons. Very often, obviously the partner who is betrayed, and betrayal trauma is one of the worst traumas, especially if there's a history of, an insecure attachment to begin with, right? And so if you are betrayed, you are going to go through one of the worst traumas in your life. And we have to recognize and hold space for the trauma of the betrayed partner. At the same time, people have affairs for many, many different reasons, some of which have nothing to do with the relationship or with their partner, even though the partner is going to take it personally because there's a expectation for fidelity, and it feels and is a huge offense on the marriage. Once we do the work of understanding why it happened, how it happened, what was the cause of it, what was being sought after, why was the vitality there, what did it make you feel? Sometimes it can be something that has to do with losing a loved one and feeling grief and needing vitality. Sometimes it is an indication of issues in the relationship. Sometimes it's an acting out because a person's not really living an authentic life and they're suppressed and oppressed, and they've learned from a young age to just get their needs met on the side and do it under the radar and try not to get into trouble. There's so many rich opportunities for real rehabilitation of a marriage after an affair. Not that you would ask for it. Look, you wouldn't ask for cancer, but people talk about how cancer, having had it, has enriched their lives and given them meaning. And, Baruch Hashem, after the recovery, they know what's important and what's not important. And, so nobody asks for it, but, sometimes we have opportunities that are made out of things that we don't want or don't ask for. So yes, it can. Yeah, it can.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Another question that came up here. If a couple listening today feels stuck, disconnected, or in the brink of giving up, what first steps would you suggest to interrupt that trajectory and reopen the possibility of repair? It's a pretty general question.
Well, I would say couples therapy. I mean, you need to go to a good couples therapist. And when I say a good couples therapist, not just somebody who's gonna say, okay, now repeat what they said, and mirror it back, but not somebody who's got like techniques, but really somebody who's going to be able to help you. I'm going to say a couple things. One is that every couple needs to be able to understand what the dynamic is. Meaning, in most relationships, within a few sessions, you can tell what's the dynamic. The more you do this, the more I do that. Who's the pursuer? Who's the distancer? Who's the avoidant? Who's the anxiously, attached, and the one who wants to all the time confront? What is the dynamic and what are the wounds that are being triggered over and over again that you bring? That, you don't just come with tabula rasa to a marriage. You don't just come with this clean slate. You come with all the baggage. And how does that baggage get touched on and triggered within the marriage? And how also can we look at ourselves and take accountability for our part? Because, a marriage where the person is saying, things will only get better when my partner changes. I'm fine, but you need to tell him or you need to tell her. Those
Right.
are definitely not going to have a well-predicted outcome. But marriages that when they come in, they're willing to do the work. And I tell people, I say, look, you have a couple choices here. You could leave the marriage, okay? Or you could say, what can I do to change the dynamic from where I sit? Everybody wants curtain number 3, which is tell him to change, tell her to
Right.
change.
You become the messenger. You're the fixer.
Yeah. But what we see a lot of times is that there isn't safety in the marriage. And then I'll say, well, if it's, let's talk about, so why are you working so hard to be in this marriage that's not safe? And they'll say, well, if I divorce, he's going to take me for everything I've got. So there's no safety in the divorce and there's no safety in the marriage. So you want
I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is that if you have children with somebody and you get divorced, divorce is not necessarily the solution for
Right.
all of your problems right now, and that you're still going to have to do major amount of work on yourself in order to preserve sanity sometimes. Because people who are in abusive relationships, whether, the words that everyone loves to throw out today, he's narcissistic, she's borderline, to the point where I think like everybody I meet is, narcissistic, borderline, or codependent. But within the spectrum of narcissism, within the spectrum of borderline, you have all these kinds of people. And if you have children with somebody like that, you're kind of stuck with them for at least until your children turn 18. And
Very hard. It's very hard, but you have to be able to acknowledge it. You have to understand what the situation is and figure out a way to strategize through until you're ready to leave. But that's not an intimate relationship. It's not a safe relationship.
right.
People
It's a
ask, well,
completely not safe relationship, but the
yeah,
illusion that divorce is going to be the solution,
no, not with somebody like that. That's the
that
thing. With somebody with a relationship like that, you talk about divorce with integrity. It's interesting that couples who are really capable of divorce with integrity and with dignity are usually the ones that have the capability to stay together because, you know, they could if they wanted to.
almost always,
Yeah.
but not this. I've had quite a few couples who had really respectful and beautiful divorces. They could not stay together. It wasn't right for him, it wasn't right for her, but that they divorced. I had a divorce once where a couple hugged each other at the get. And the dying got very suspicious because there have been couples who
Yeah.
have divorced for financial reasons because they wanted, one was about to go bankrupt. So they like transferred all the debt to one of them, transferred all the property to the other one, continued living
Wow.
together and
Oh, wow.
divorced, and they did the get and everything, but they were just trying to run away from their creditors. So he's like, what is going on here? And I'm like, it's just they can't stay married. But they really do love each other very deeply. And I believe they will
I've
get
had a couple
remarried
of
one
those.
day.
I've had a couple of those, and they're beautiful to watch. And
And he
they
made he
have,
made them divorce again. We did the
oh my
get
God.
again because he was
Wow.
like, no, 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 something's wrong here. I don't. He
Good.
couldn't handle that. They were
Yeah.
literally hugging each other and crying, and it actually reminded me of the Medrash when Hashem destroyed the Beit Hamikdash,
Yeah.
that the Kruvim were embracing each other as Am Yisrael and Hashem were being, so to speak, separated. Um, it was, and I have seen that. It's
It's
rare,
very
extremely
emotional.
rare.
It's sad and beautiful. But when you see that the couple can really express their appreciation to each other for what they had, that they're able to talk about what they weren't able to get with one another, and that they could wish each other well, and that they could even do things together as a family for the sake of the kids.
Right.
It's a very, very beautiful thing.
And very rare.
Yeah.
It is very, if at least from
Although it
my
happens,
experience,
it
it's
does
very rare.
happen.
I think in the secular world, it's more common because in the
Sure.
secular world, it's okay to get divorced, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
It's
It's
part of the
not.
life cycle
Right.
in some
Right.
communities.
Right.
But in our very couple family oriented, in Israel in general, even amongst secular Israelis, you're married, you got a family, you got a,
Right.
it's not so common, but it has happened. It has happened. So true what you're saying that if people who could work it out, but just going back to the very important point that people have to realize is that divorce is not the solution to all your problems. It is a certain alleviation where a person isn't in a relationship where they're losing their autonomy completely and they have no agency over the trajectory of their life or what goes on in their home. But at the same time, it brings on a whole new set of problems. So you're not going to have intimate problems, right? You have to deal with a lot of the post-trauma maybe of intimacy, which is something that I tell a lot of my clients before you jump into what they call in Israel Perek Bet, right? Chapter 2, remarriage. You've got to work that stuff out. You got to go to somebody, a lot of trauma there.
Because your template from your first marriage is almost wired in, and you have to do the work of processing the marriage and what went wrong, and also getting to know yourself and what your expectations are and can be, and how you can be assertive and how you can do things differently. But it's a
Right.
lot of communication.
It that's the word, communication,
Mhm.
safety, being able to communicate. And I see something that really scares me a lot is the AI communication. right? Where I see kids, teenagers and young adults, right? So they don't know what to say to their girlfriend. So they ask AI, what should I answer my girlfriend, right? And AI tells them what to answer the girlfriend. And then
There's a
she
lot,
doesn't know what to answer the boyfriend. So she asks AI, what should I answer the boyfriend? And then you have this conversation, which is between AI and AI. It's between Grok and ChatGPT, and there's actually no people present here. It scares me.
yeah, yeah. Well, it scares you. It scares a lot of people. I think it scares a lot of industries, and who knows where the world is going with AI. But it is losing a lot of the basic human elements of being able to feel things and express your feelings in your own personal way. That there is kind of a movement away from it on a global level. But I think at the end of the day, humans will be humans. Hopefully, that will
Hope so.
retain those elements of being human beings.
Because if not, we'll have we're not even in a relationship.
Right. Well, relationships are, listen, the statistics are showing marriage is on the decline, relationships are on the decline, sex is on the decline, and people are, you know, having relationships with robots, literally. So the world is kind of going crazy out there in terms of human relations. And, I think that there are shifts. Who knows? There might be a backlash to that at some point. But if we zoom out and look at that, I think there is concern there.
It's very concerning.
Boy,
Okay.
we have a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah. We, yeah, one other topic that I wanted to bring up was something that I find fascinating. And I was just reading a book by a colleague of mine, Sarah Yehudit Schneider, a colleague in teaching Torah. She's not in Torah and Rabbanit, where she wrote an incredible book about shame and the
Mm.
Kabbalistic perspective on shame. And I was thinking a lot about the book. She doesn't actually address sexuality in the book. At the end of the book, she gives like a long list of topics, which could be future books, and sexuality and shame is one of them. But it's truly a fascinating thing that the first time that shame is mentioned in the Torah, the first time that any emotion, which shame is the first one, is mentioned in the Torah, is directly linked to nakedness.
Mhm.
Which it's not saying that it's
Exposure,
what?
exposure.
Exposure, right?
Mhm.
Exposure and maybe even vulnerability in that certain sense. We
Mhm.
can probably stretch it in a lot of different directions. But I think it's a fascinating thing that at the same time that is, so to speak, the Av, the father, the module, of shame, it's also the place which is also called yidiyah, which is knowledge, which is intimacy, which is connection and closeness. So there's a tremendous amount of potential of shame here. And then there's a tremendous potential for kedusha, right? And what we're always trying to do is to bring it over to the side of kedusha, right? Which is kedusha, if we want to translate it literally, it means separation, which means intent, right? So we were talking about, how important you were sharing the agency and having autonomy, and that is what kedusha is. Kedusha means I'm making a choice, right? I'm separating myself from the entire world, and I'm separating you, and it's just you and I in a very, very private and personal and intimate setting. And we're so challenged today that everything is Instagram and it's everywhere. Everybody has WhatsApp. Everybody has, and I actually don't have Instagram. I got it to spy on my kids and I can't figure out how to use it. So I have to ask them to help me spy on their brothers. It doesn't really work too well. So, because they all have fake accounts anyways, where I am only seeing the account that they want me to see, and then they have their private account. So we're in this world where there is no privacy, right? And we're encouraged not to have privacy. And we're so influenced by what this person's doing, by what that person's doing, by influencers, right? I mean, who does commercials now? Commercials are done by influencers. And the younger generation is, on the other hand, they have maybe more knowledge and they can come into a relationship saying, oh, I want this, I don't want this. But that has a huge backlash of expectations, of comparison, of contrasting, of jealousy, of not being able to create a real intimate relationship. Do you
Yeah.
see that in your work?
Yeah, look, I think that every um, the further you go towards the westernized world, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages, right? So on the one hand, women being exposed to Instagram are going to learn about, how to find red flags and what to do if you're in an abusive relationship, and, how
Mhm.
you don't have to have sex on the wedding night if you're not ready. Like, there are all sorts of messages that you are exposed to. At the same time, you're exposed to a lot of other things, to influencers and to the private lives of people who decide to make their lives more public. So this is, it's like a double-edged sword, because Haredi Hasidic Judaism has been used to keeping their lives very insular and away from, really kind of protected from outside influences. And the more that they were able to do that, the more they were able to thrive. Once outside influences come into those societies, they start to fall apart in a sense, because people begin to realize that there are other options that they didn't know about. Like, I remember once a woman saying to me, "Nobody ever told me." And then I found out later that you don't have to do it on, like, you don't have to do it on your wedding night. I never knew that. I did that kind of thing. So I think that there's going to be advantages as well as disadvantages to any of these global trends that we've been discussing today. And that, the important thing is to be able to be prepared and to teach our kids so that they don't have to go elsewhere to places where may or may not be in accordance to our values. Let's really use the words that we want them to use, but explain the concepts. Take the shame out of talking about bodies and sexuality and attraction and desire and all of those things, and not just talk about it in the, in terms of like abuse or disgusting or predators, or that there's also beautiful aspects to sexuality, and that it's part of life, and that it's part of enjoyment, and that we can really, Hashem gives us so many different options for enjoyment: our smells, taste, touch, and the touch is so beautiful. And all of these things are precursors to the ability to, once we get married, when it's appropriate and allowed, to have the tools already built in to be able to want and be able to take in a touch and hugs and desire in a positive way.
Okay. So we have a lot of topics that we didn't get to yet,
Right.
which I
Our
really would
time
like to
is
explore more about how early on sexual abuse affects marriage. I'd like to also talk, yeah, there's a lot to
well,
say
this
about
is
that.
this is what I'll say, because I don't have a ton of time, but I do have a lot of resources. If you can get into my website, which many of those listening may not be able to, unfortunately, because it doesn't go through all the filters that people have. But I do have, if you don't even go through my site, but if you search um, for intimacy and sexual abuse, I do have a talk that I gave for again, in America. It's called JCH, I think, or J something. I can look it up,
Okay,
and
you can send me the link and
I can
I'll
send
post
you a
it
link in
with
the
this.
show notes, and I can send you a link to my website for whoever can get in. I have blogs, and I do have a lot of information about sexual trauma and intimacy when there's been a history of sexual trauma. I mean, these are very, very important topics to know about, and to be able to navigate. So I'll be happy to send you whatever resources I can send you.
Okay, great. And maybe we'll have a follow-up talk about that and some other topics that we didn't get close to, but I really thank you, and I hope that all our listeners, I'm sure that all our listeners, um, at least they know that they're not alone in this, that these are
Oh,
topics which
it's
are
such
so
common
common
topics. Yeah,
and
yeah.
so out there,
You
and
are
that
not
a
alone.
lot of resources and help are available. And there's no reason to just suffer in silence and carry on. Doesn't mean that you have to put a blog about it, right? But to be able to get the help that they need and guidance that they need from reliable and good sources. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.